In the name of God who loves us and calls us to respond. Amen. Around the world today, for those who keep the Christian calendar, people are showing up. They are coming forward. And even when the church is taking ashes to go, people are, much as we will this afternoon, willingly submitting themselves to the imposition of ashes, to those harrowing words that God speaks to Adam and Eve on their way out of the garden. Dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Perhaps it is because on this day we've taken off our mask. At least ritually, that is what we are invited to do. Have you brought yours with you today? The one you wear so that others will see you as the Nick you want them to see, know, love, value, and even as Jesus suggests in the gospel today, reward. But even more so, people come perhaps because we as the church take off our mask and become more in touch with the dust of all humanity. We lift off our mask, and in the mirror that is the ashes on another's forehead, we see the truth being spoken not only to Adam and Eve, not only to Jews, even not only to Christians, but to all peoples and all persons. The universal said in the context of the particular. People need that from today. We need that from today. Full disclosure, it doesn't sound like good news. Maybe it's just honest news. Perhaps it is release. Try as we might, we do not conquer death. Oh, but that death would not conquer us. That was the old world way of thinking about it. Perhaps not so old for some who are stuck thinking that our whole lives are lived in fear of death, not because we'd cease to exist, but because of the two extremes that lie just beyond death. That concept, escape plan Christianity, heaven or hell, reverse engineered into us all a convenient way, well, at least for the church, a convenient way, of thinking in duality. This is the temptation we face when we hear Jesus' words in the gospel today. Righteous or unrighteous, in public or in secret. Defining things not by the full and true experience of what they are, but by the allergic avoidance to what they most certainly are not. But I believe you won't fall for it. After all, as Franciscan Father Richard Rohr says of this day, the same day we have our faces publicly marked with ash, in some cases with media present and most certainly social media, we are told by Jesus not to contort our faces so as to show that we are fasting. On the day when so many will take an hour off of work to come to a public service at church or stop along the light rail, Jesus tells us not to pray in public so that others see what we are doing. And on one of the few weekdays in our life where we'll pass the offering plate, we are told that in giving alms, we are not to let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. And so, of course, with a hint of irony and perhaps some humor, we see that non-dual thinking invites paradox, invites these two ways to come together so we can together examine a holy Lent. I am convinced that to be the dust of Adam is good news. It is the dust of creation. It is animated, dust. It is the dust full of potentiality, even as it is the dust of tragedy, brokenness, anxiety, shame, and separation. Today we come, full stop, to acknowledge, as so many from the 12-step programs know, that we have a problem. Not that we are a problem, but that we have a problem. Perhaps many problems, and we are powerless over them. You can name them for yourself. You could go ahead and name it right now. For my dust, or her dust, or his dust, you won't be able to tell any difference. Whether that naming for you is greed or addiction, self-denial or abuse. Whatever it is, you can name it now. We won't be able to tell the difference because the very substance that we hold as the symbol of that problem and that powerlessness takes the same shape on our foreheads too. And it is the place where our dust is heading, if it has not already been there. It is the place where sin goes to be crucified, as Paul writes of Jesus, who became sin so that we might become the holiness of God. It is the cross. And that's just it. The good news, the paradox, God's forgiveness to us, which incorporates the seemingly bad, the negative, literally gives it dust so that it can be transformed, so that our potentiality is always surpassing and always desired by the very holiness of God. We see the duality fading away. If God meets us in the most human of realities, then we must return and always be returning to the dust of creation, that which God called good and loved into being. Now, as all good 12-steppers know, and you can ask Martin Luther about this as well, we don't simply expunge ourselves of whatever we've just named a few moments ago by coming to the noonday Ash Wednesday service at St. Barnabas on February the 18th, 2015. No, we would naively be giving too much power to the ritual. That would inevitably disappoint most of us in about a day or so when we find ourselves yet again behind that car that refuses to turn right on red. Rather, the invitation is to always, with humility and honesty, name that dusty part of us, to be in touch with what is under the mask, to be, as Luther pointed to it, simultaneously a saint and a sinner, or as the AA folks call it, recovering alcoholics, always an alcoholic, and simultaneously, with focused effort and community support, always recovering. Always returning, we might say, to ourselves this day, to a dust that doesn't allow death or dual thinking to rule our lives, but rather to a dust that is the fullness of life itself. And in the taking the form of a cross on our foreheads this day invites us into a holy Lent full of potentiality for each of us and for all of us, all of humanity together. Now is the acceptable time. Now is the time of salvation. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Amen.